Okay. We are ready to dive into our Isaiah study again this evening after a few weeks off. And okay. So in Isaiah 6, if you remember, we're kind of talking about how it's a restart. 1 through 5 are almost like a prologue, and then it kind of starts in chapter 6. It's not really that way entirely because chapter 1 is a start, but chapter 6 is kind of like a restart, and it gives this statement about in the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord sitting on his throne, high and lifted up, and these things, and the angel comes, and it's really a picture of salvation we talked about last time in many ways. And God asks, who will go and speak for me? And Isaiah says he will, and God gives this message. And we'll refresh on that just a little bit, but I guess I always got to remember, since this is going out to the world at large, each week I want to make sure that I say somewhere, so nobody thinks I'm attributing these things to myself, I'm trying to relate to our Bible study group here tonight, our Sunday evening service, my notes from school, from the class on the Old Testament prophets from Professor David Needham. So these are his notes that we received in seminary, what he took us through, and I'm just trying to walk through these things with our group here as well. So yes, we saw in Isaiah 6 his calling particularly, and this great picture really of a person who's not saved, and then it becomes saved, and it's a really great picture of how that works even for us. And then there's the commission from the Lord. He says he'll go, and then like, okay, what do you want me to do? I'm going to do whatever you want. He says, okay, go to the people and tell them everything's going to go really badly for you. And I don't want you to understand and turn to me, because then so it's this really hard message. No, it doesn't have the part about, yeah, it does too, very beginning of it. Keep on hearing but do not understand. Keep on seeing but do not perceive. Make the heart of this people dull and their ears heavy. They blind their eyes, lest they see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn and be healed. Like, wow, this is pretty bad. They deserve judgment, yes, but how long is this going to go on, Lord? And he says basically until everything's destroyed. Because that's the effect of sin. That's the depth of sin, that it's that wrong. It deserves this kind of judgment. And so he makes these statements about until all these things are the case in the land. The house is without people, the land is desolate waste, cities lie waste. All these statements. And then at the very end of that, says, then verse 13, Isaiah 6:13, and though a tenth remain in it, it will be burned again like a terebinth or an oak whose stump remains when it is felled. The holy seed is its stump. And we mentioned that last time. So we're going to look at that. It's a very interesting reference there, and it bears some study, and it's quite interesting what we find when we look there. His initial notes on this say this in 6:13 is the foundation passage which explains all occurrences of this imagery, the branch imagery in the Old Testament. And we're going to walk through these examples. That's all I really had on the schedule tonight, or the plan for tonight, is just talk about this part here, unless it doesn't take very much time. But I think it will. There's quite a few verses to read, and we'll probably just go through this evening. So it's really quite an interesting title, or, yeah, I guess you'd call it a title, or a designation, a name. Isaiah is told that his own generation would not respond, that they, like a tree, would be felled, cut down until they would be but a stump in the ground. It sounded so hopeless. Was there any hope? Yes, there's hope, because the holy seed was in that stump. It's a really interesting picture here. So again, that's in 6:13 we just read. Like a terebinth or an oak whose stump remains when it is felled, the holy seed is its stump. Now, with your fingers there, keep it there, but turn over. You can all turn if you want to, and I'll start asking for readers. Andrea, why don't you start for us so Nathan can hand you the microphone. Isaiah 11. Turn over to chapter 11. So this shows up elsewhere in Isaiah and elsewhere in scriptures, and he's making the statement, the professor, is that this 1 in 6 is kind of the key or the foundation for it, that everything else kind of can build off this foundation. Then even though one reference is earlier in Isaiah 4, we're going to get to that too. So look then at Isaiah 11 and verse 1 and then 10.
There shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, and a branch from his roots shall bear fruit. In that day the root of Jesse, who shall stand as a signal for the peoples, of him shall the nations inquire, and his resting place shall be glorious.
And what was the term again in verse 1? Was it branch?
A shoot and a branch.
A shoot and a branch, or a sprout and a branch, some versions would say. So there's several words that are going to be used here. There's branch, there's sprout, shoot. All this imagery, root, stump, all these things about trees, branches, roots, stumps, all this stuff are all the same image being used with just different words describing it. And it's really kind of funny. Well, I'll get to that part later. The idea of sprout. I'll come back to that one particularly. Okay, so the holy seed was in that stump. The holy seed is its stump, it says in 6:13. And someday, as Andrew read, a shoot will spring up from the stem of Jesse, and a branch from the roots. So from what's left, new life is going to come. The life is contained in that broken, cut off stump that's still in the ground. So the remnant, Israel hasn't been destroyed. The root is still there. Even the stump and the roots are still there, but seriously cut down, but still alive. So there'd be this new life that comes, but just new life? No more than just any life. In fact, this sprout, this life, is going to be a king. Let's look now. Lydia, you want to read next? If I just go in order, I don't know how many people are going to get to read. And Caleb, you got your Bible with you? You want to get one? Lydia, Jeremiah 23, and Caleb, Jeremiah 33. Anybody see a Bible you can hand to Caleb? There you go. Jeremiah 23, Lydia, and Jeremiah 33, Caleb. And I'll read these progressions again because we're going to have pauses in between. I want to keep our progression in mind. Okay, so Lydia, you're in Jeremiah 23, verse 5.
Behold,
Hang on. Caleb, are you ready? Jeremiah 33:15 is yours. 15. Okay, so listen for references, some of those words being used for this sprout, this branch. Listen for that as well as the idea of a king. So Jeremiah 23:5.
behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will raise up for David a righteous branch, and he shall reign as king and deal wisely, and shall execute justice and righteousness in the land.
And 33:15, Caleb? Oh, hand on the mic, yep. Microphone. You're 33:15, Caleb.
In those days and at the time I will cause a righteous branch to spring up for David, and he shall execute justice and righteousness in the land.
Almost exactly the same wording, both in Jeremiah 23 and 33. So again, here's our progression. The holy seed is in that stump. Someday, this branch or sprout will come out of that. Out of this root of Jesse will spring up. This sprout then is not just any person. It's a person who's going to be a king. That's what we hear in both Jeremiah 23 and 33. But just a king? Let's keep moving. How about Nathan? You've been there recently. How about Zechariah 6, verse 12? And Iva, get almost ready. Could you go, Iva, to Isaiah 53? We'll get there in a little bit here, just after Nathan. Kirk and Bryn, turn over to Hebrews, roughly. That'll be next. Okay, so Nathan, this one will not just be a king, but what? Zechariah 6:12.
Tell him this is what the Lord Almighty says. Here is the man whose name is the branch, and he will branch out from his place and build the temple of the Lord.
Keep reading.
It is he who will build the temple of the Lord, and he will be clothed with majesty and will sit and rule on his throne. And he will be a priest on his throne, and there will be harmony between the two.
Was that 13? Okay, so I need to make an amendment here. It's not just 12, it's 12 and 13. So not just a king, but what also? A priest. Well, this is interesting. So there's life in this stump. Person is going to be born. This shoot will spring up out of the stump. Someday this will happen, and this sprout, this shoot that comes up, will be a king. Just a king? So not just a child, a king. Not just a king. No, also a priest. Okay, well, this is getting quite interesting. Who is this person? Of course, we know. It's becoming clear already. This is a messianic title, in other words. So a priest as well. Yet more than a priest who offers sacrifices, this priest, the branch, the sprout, will also be a sacrificial lamb. Here we want to be in Isaiah 53. Iva, if you have the microphone there, can you read verse 2 and then 7 and then 12?
He grew up before him like a tender shoot and like a root out of dry ground. He had no beauty or majesty to attract us to him, nothing in his appearance that we should desire him.
Verse 7.
He was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before her shearers, in silence, so he did not open his mouth.
And then 12.
Therefore I will give him a portion among the great, and he will divide the spoils with the strong, because he poured out his life unto death, and was numbered with the transgressors, for he bore the sin of many.
So this is more than a priest who offers sacrifices. I mean, that would have been interesting enough if this shoot that is born out of the stump became a king who also serves as a priest. But priests come and go. They do their ministry for a time and they're done. But this is a priest who doesn't just offer sacrifice. This priest, the branch, the sprout, will also be a sacrificial lamb. And just parts of what I've read. For he grew up before him like a tender shoot, a sprout, like a root out of the dry ground, like a lamb that is led to slaughter. He poured out himself to death. He bore the sins of many. And then we come over to Hebrews, and we come, I guess we say, let's add to this idea of the sacrificial lamb, and let's add a few more. So Hebrews 4:15, Mike, then if you'll go to 7:3, Betsy, do you have a Bible separately from Mike? Hebrews 9:26, back to Andrea. Or did I miss? Oh, right. Kirk and Bryn. So Kirk and Bryn take 4:15 and 7:3, but they're sharing a Bible, so let's say where we were. Kirk and Bryn take 4:15, Mike 7:3, Betsy 9:26, Andrea 10:12, and Lydia 9:28. All of Hebrews. Because this kind of brings it all together in some ways. And of course, we know we're talking about Christ already, but we have this shoot, this branch, this person. This person is also going to be king, not just a king, but a priest, not just a normal priest, but a priest who is actually the sacrificial lamb. And then we hear like Hebrews 4:15.
For we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but was in all points tempted as we are, yet without sin.
And then pass the mic back, and Hebrews 7:3, and then 9:26.
Without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but made like the Son of God, he abides a priest perpetually.
9:26.
Otherwise, he would have need to suffer often since the foundation of the world. But now, once at the consummation of the ages, he has been manifested to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself.
Back up to the front. Microphone games. Pass it, pass it. I'm open. 10:12 of Hebrews.
But when Christ had offered for all time a single sacrifice for sins, he sat down at the right hand of God.
And 928, Lydia.
So Christ, having been offered once to bear the sins of many, will appear a second time, not to deal with sin, but to save those who are eagerly waiting for him.
A very different priest, as we know that Jesus is, a very different priest than the normal human priests. And he gave this sacrifice once for all. Here's some of the highlights. Jesus, our great high priest, who, quote, abides a priest perpetually, who has been, quote, manifested to put away sin by the sacrifice of himself, as, another quote, one sacrifice for sins for all time. Again, quoting, so Christ also, having been offered once to bear the sins of many, shall appear a second time, not to bear sin, to those who eagerly await him for salvation. So he says here, thus with this promise, we look forward to the fulfillment of that very first branch or sprout promise that we saw, although we didn't really see it. But in Isaiah, back to Isaiah, turn to chapter 4. All these things having been kind of put together in order, we come back to Isaiah chapter 4, verse 2. I'll read it for you. In that day, the branch of the Lord, see, before you got there, you don't really know what this is yet. But we go on this passage of discovery. And in that day, the branch of the Lord shall be beautiful and glorious, and the fruit of the land shall be the pride and honor of the survivors of Israel. So now we know that that branch is Jesus Christ. And he kind of ends up by going back. So the lion from the tribe of Judah, the root of David, the root and the offspring of David, the bright and morning star, these are also terms that we could look at. Turn over to Revelation chapter 5. I just spoil it by saying them, but let's see this again. Revelation chapter 5, verse 5. And one of the elders said to me, weep no more. Behold, the lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has conquered, so that he can open the scroll and its 7 seals. Then turn over to the last chapter, Revelation 22, at the very end. Revelation 22, verse 16. Almost the end of the Bible. I, Jesus, speaking himself, I have sent my angel to testify to you about these things for the churches. I am the root and the descendant of David, the bright morning star. That's a pretty fun progression, I think, to see. Because it's not a common thing. We don't talk about Jesus in those terms very often. It's such a rich imagery. And to see the progression, as Professor Needham set that out, to see it again after all these years was quite good. And here's the thing I was kind of chuckling about. I said, no, I'll save that for later. This whole thing about the sprout, haven't you heard some people talk about a little baby that way? Oh, he's such a cute little sprout. Look at him. I mean, you hear that term once in a while. It has almost the idea, just a little shaver, just a little sprout. Yeah, a little shaver. Isn't that maybe also like a little cutting off the tree, right? A little shaver. Doesn't refer to the haircut, does it? So there's some terms like that are kind of embedded even in our vernacular, in our talking. But it all comes back to Christ, and it's so interesting to see. It's just this one little thing. The holy seed is its stump. Back to Isaiah 7, verse 13. Though a tenth remain in it, it will be burned again like a terebinth or an oak, whose stump remains when it is felled. The holy seed is its stump, or is contained in that stump. And again, so we know that Christ came out of that remnant. There was only a remnant. They were so badly destroyed by so many conquering nations, Assyria, Babylon, the Chaldeans, and yet God is faithful to his chosen people. They never got completely destroyed. They survived according to his plan, and at just the right time, that just mess of a stump that's left with barely clinging on to anything of life, but out of that comes this little sprout that comes out of that. This sprout is Jesus Christ himself, the branch, the root, the sprout. Yeah, that's the progression of this imagery from Isaiah 6:13. And now comes the challenging part. So that only took like 15 minutes or less. But any comments now, we'd have to try to pass around the mic or just have our own comments and not worry about it. We don't need to go any further tonight. I have other stuff I could share, but it really starts the whole next section. I'd rather not. So maybe we'll end up early or just maybe we'll have more discussion than I think. But go ahead. Would you like the mic, Mike? So let me know what you think of these things and add to it as God is kind of impressing things on your heart and mind tonight.
Up till now, we've talked about the branch and the root and the sprout and how Christ fulfills all those things. But also in the Old Testament, it refers to the Messiah as they're looking forward. And so I'm looking at Daniel, and I'm thinking about how it's the prophecies of Daniel about the Messiah who is to come, the prince or whatever. And I'm trying to think of a verse that directly connects the branch and the root to the actual Messiah in the Old Testament, and I can't think of one off the top. But anyway, maybe we could talk about that or think about that.
Yeah. Anybody got any ideas along those lines? Or go ahead.
I think it was really interesting that David was listed as the righteous one. Yeah, and I think of all we look at David's life and realize that God believed him, followed him, loved him, but he was not righteous all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And we are not righteous all the time.
Yep.
But Christ was.
Yeah.
And I think
there was a perfection to that branch, root, sprout thing. It was, came from this tainted stump, but untainted itself, or something along those lines. Yeah. Others, comments, thoughts, input? Do you want a concordance, Mike? Do you think there's a branch or root reference in Daniel? We could look for some of those words. I'm going to get one while you're looking. Other comments? Somebody's really quick at reading, you can open the concordance, or I can, and look for, see if we see any references. Daniel references. Be in the. Which one did you think, Mike? You think branch, or any idea? What's?
The only reference I was thinking of was the 70 weeks, and after 62 weeks in chapter 9, verse 26, and then after the 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off, which is when Christ went to the cross.
Yes.
And have nothing, and there's a reference to him as the Messiah. And I can't think of one in Daniel that refers to the branch, and I was just curious about that.
Yeah, I don't see one in the concordance here.
Okay.
There's nothing in Daniel about branch, but I could look for root. I could look for shoot or sprout, just for fun. Root. Let's see. Root. No, don't see any root in Daniel. Shoot. I don't mean shoot. I can't find what I mean. I'm looking for the word shoot. I mean, we know they're related because they're all about Christ, but yeah, is the word there? Shoot.
You know, I think back also to Deuteronomy, where Moses has been a prophet to Israel, and God said, I will raise up a prophet from among their countrymen like you, and I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I command him. I think also another reference to the Messiah, not referenced as Messiah or branch in either case, but still talking about Christ.
Yeah. Yeah, I looked under shoot and sprout and don't see any Daniel references necessarily either. I mean, there's some of each of these words has multiple places where they're used, and some others may be messianic, but I don't know right off that. But yeah, there's so many interesting ways that Christ is spoken of and his glories proclaimed. Any other thoughts or comments? You can just jump on in. You can take us on a different tangent if you want to. Yeah, I think we saw all these. Here's the Isaiah ones. The branch of the Lord will be beautiful. Both palm branch and reed in a single day. That's probably not messianic. From his roots a branch will bear fruit. We read that one. Some of these probably aren't messianic. Palm branch or reed. We read the Jeremiah 23 and 33 ones were there.
Betsy was interesting reference also in Daniel when Nebuchadnezzar is given a prophetic thing from Daniel where he's talking about he has a stump.
That's right.
In a root, in a shoot, and
bound in iron for
the
the times
a picture of
and
his coming back.
similar imagery, and there was still signifying there was still life there would come back, and kept for that day. Now Nathan, you were reading in Zechariah 6. We'd have to look and see the context, but in Zechariah 3:8, I'm going to bring my servant the branch. I mean, it sounds like it's Christ as well in Zechariah 3:8, although it could be referring to Zerubbabel or Ezra or others as we've been in Zechariah himself. But yeah.
When you talked about it originally, you said because of the one later and all these other contexts, you thought it was because of how it's used to refer him to Christ elsewhere.
So when we studied that in our study of Zechariah, we thought that it was messianic at the time, right?
Because of all these other verses.
Yeah, because of the other verses. So Zechariah 3:8, anybody listening online, you might want to look at that also. Yeah. Well, as we wrap up, how about application thoughts tonight or encouragement thoughts? How does this affect us in some way as believers to learn about this strange imagery of the branch and the root? Nathan, microphone.
I suppose this isn't terribly specific, but just that, seeing how God puts themes and symbols and messages and promises of future just all throughout Scripture, and sometimes they're kind of just interwoven, like a little bit here and a little bit in this other book, and some in the Old Testament, some in the New Testament, the interweaving of it all,
Almost like there's a guiding mind behind all of it.
yeah, just another reason to be just amazed at how, clever isn't the right word, but just how intentional and well thought out and broad God's plan is, and pays attention to every detail and the subtleties, and these things just impress us with his intelligence and his wisdom, and of course all the fulfilled promises.
But yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about. I mean, look at the reality of that particular image of this branch, sprout, root thing, and how many different books of the Bible we're in that use that specific word. It wasn't a ton of them, but they weren't all at the same era even. I mean, some were in Revelation, written way later. And it's just another of those confidence-inspiring thoughts to realize that this book really does have a single author. It's God ordained it, and the Holy Spirit is the one who carried those along as they wrote it. And there's an interesting encouragement in that to realize this is a wholly unique book.
sort of interesting to realize that Jesus died on the cross, which is wood.
Yeah, okay,
And-
yes.
And some,
Good point.
some people say on a tree.
Yeah,
But the issue is that from that grew the whole Christian faith.
yeah. Yeah, that's another.
And David was righteousness. Christ is righteousness, ultimately righteousness.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is kind of related to what Nathan was saying, but I think when we got to Revelation, I was just, the thing that's striking me tonight, I've never really thought of you hear about all the different books of the Bible, and it's something I've never really considered as much, that it really is all one book. And I guess looking at all the verses tonight, it's just striking me how much of a dramatic story this really is. And you start at the beginning with this incredible creation story, and you have all this history and all these battles and losses and joys and triumphs and sorrows, and then you get to Revelations, and it's like this dramatic culmination of everything we're looking forward to. And it almost feels like something you would, well, it's way too long to do this, but something you would read like 5 hours at night just in a row, trying to get through all of it because you just can't put the book down. It's never really had the feeling for me before like that, but just right now it kind of feels like this incredible story that I really want to read through, like all in one night, even though it's basically impossible.
Yes, it is. Although I did an all-night Bible reading in youth group one time. We read the entire Bible onto audio tape back in the 80s, and we did it in less than 24 hours. Barely. You did it too, right? Yeah.
Kind of the way it was with Zane or somebody like that.
Yeah, when he first became a believer, he just could not stop reading. He was just enamored with God's word.
I guess I think the thing that struck me tonight about this, about the seed and the sprout and the root and the branch and all that, is that God did not need Israel. He did not have to use them. They didn't have to be the remnant that Jesus came out of or anything. He could have done it all on his own. I mean, because Jesus was the seed, he was the sprout, he was the branch, he was the root. He's talked about in all of those capacities. He wasn't limited by any of those things. He was all in all. He was everything, the beginning and the end, the Alpha and Omega. And yet he chose to work through Israel and through that remnant, and he chose to have all of these ways it would work out in the prophecies and the plan and all of that. And so I think it just reminds me of God's incredible power and sufficiency, and that he doesn't need us. He chooses to work in us and through us, but he does not need any person to do what his plan is and to complete and accomplish his purposes, because he is God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Any other thoughts or comments tonight? That's all. Bye.